So my name is Dawn. I'm the interpretive ranger for Ice Age Fossil State Park, which is part of the Nevada Division of State Parks. And it's very similar to like the National Park Service or some of the other state park services, but we have multiple parks all over the state, and we just try to take care of the land and give people the opportunity to enjoy the outdoors.
Thanks for joining. Thank you, Mr. Cross, for helping us with this virtual field trip. I want to thank Ranger Dawn, too, for working with us and showing us all these cool fossils. So my name is Becky Hall. I'm the Education Director at the Nevada Science Center, also the co-founder. So we just started up the Nevada Science Center this year, and we are a new nonprofit organization that wants to bring research and education to educators and students like you are today, and opportunities to learn more about our state of Nevada. And not just people from Nevada, but people from all over the world. We have a lot of really cool things. We love our state here, and we want to make sure that you guys can learn a little bit more about science, about fossils, biology, paleontology, you name it. So we're open to bringing you guys any type of science. So if you have any requests, you can always email us or check us out at sciencecenternevada.org. And then I'll let Dr. Bondi, Josh Bondi, talk.
I'm Dr. Josh Bondi. I'm the Director of Research for the Nevada Science Center. Becky hit all the important points about what the Science Center is about, but I'll just add that in telling the story of science, you can always tell a better story if you're a part of it. And so that's why we believe in going out there and actually doing active research, because being active scientists makes it easier for us to tell the stories of science to you when we do our special programs like this. So it's our pleasure to go out and do the science and then to share it with you.
Here we're going to be talking about some of the collections from the Ice Age Fossil Beds State Park, one of our newest recent state parks. It's under construction, and Ranger Dawn's going to be talking about some of the fossils that are here in collections that will eventually be moved to the park and be on display. So I'll give it to you, Ranger Dawn, and then we're going to look at some of her fossils that she has to show us.
All right. Thank you. Like she said, my name is Dawn. I am the interpretive ranger at Ice Age Fossil State Park. I'm also a paleontologist and a geologist. Ice Age Fossil State Park is one of the newest Nevada state parks, and it's actually currently under construction. It's in an area of town known as Tule Springs. Now, Tule Springs is in North Las Vegas, and it is full of Ice Age fossils. Now, this park is also, this area is also protected by two different parks. One is Ice Age Fossil State Park, where I'm stationed. The other is the Tule Springs Fossil Beds National Monument. Now, like I said, our park is under construction, but when we do open, we're going to have a visitor center that has museum exhibits. Some of the items, well, actually all of the items that I'm going to show you today are going to be on display there. We're also going to have a bunch of trails. We're going to do a lot of programs for visitors of all ages. And we're also the permanent home for the monumental mammoth, which I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. And as the name suggests, we do have Ice Age fossils at the park. We have a lot of the megafauna, or the really large animals, things that would weigh about as much as an adult human, or way more in some cases. Stuff like Columbian mammoths. We have giant ground sloths, horses, bison, saber-toothed cats. We have camels, dire wolves, and even American lions. And all of these critters went extinct at the end of the last ice age about 12,000 years ago. So I am going to show you some of those things, but that is not the only thing that we have at the park. So we also have a lot of man-made artifacts, some of them dating back to about 12,000 years. We also have a bunch of plant and animal species. Some of them are endangered or threatened. And we also have a rich geologic history spanning not just one, but two ice ages. And it covers and tells the story of Las Vegas and how it went from a more lush green environment to the dry desert that we see today. So one of the things that we highlight at the park, we have several themes that we highlight at the park. One of them is scientific discovery. Without scientific discovery, we wouldn't have all of the items that you see today, and we wouldn't know nearly as much about the fossil beds as we do. and the scientific exploration and discovery actually goes back over 100 years at the site. So the first record of fossils ever found in the area of Tule Springs was back in 1903. Now, there were lots of other fossils and things that were found over the next few decades, but what they were most eager to find was actually evidence of the first people entering the area. And so they were looking for man-made artifacts, not necessarily fossils. But that didn't mean that they ignored the fossils. So I do have a few things from some of these early explorations, fossils that we could show you. I'm going to focus the fossils on the megafauna that went extinct. So this picture right here, this is, I mean, it's really small together. Actually, I'm going to put it down because my hands are shaking, but it's actually the toe bone from an American lion. This particular fossil was found in 1919 and is the first record of American lion in the Tule Springs area. The next item that I have for you, this was something that was found in 1933. Now this is a partial ground sloth skull from a Shasta ground sloth. It is missing most of the front portion where the nose is, and if we had the whole skull, it would have been roughly about this long. But if you look at this, it's kind of cool because you can actually see like where the spinal cord entered the brain cavity, but we're also missing parts on the side, the cheekbones and stuff like that. But this was the first evidence of ground sloths in the valley. Now, let's talk about some of the archaeology, because like I said, the majority of what they were looking for were man-made items. So the first major discovery came in 1933. It was the same person who found the Shasta ground sloth skull. He found a number of other artifacts that were with some of these fossils. The first one, the major one that we're going to look at, is this teeny tiny little shard of volcanic glass called obsidian. Now, this is, I mean, you can see it's pretty tiny. And even though it's so small, this was the first major find. And it's major because, not because of the material that it is, because obsidian is fairly common in some areas, and it's also used quite regularly to make projectile points and things like that. But it's unique in the Tule Springs area because we don't have obsidian anywhere near us, which means that somebody had to bring it here. So somebody brought it from somewhere far away, and it ended up in the fossil beds. And somebody with very good eyes ended up picking this up. Now, I've got some other items found from some of the other expeditions that came out. These were all picked up during the 1960s in what is known as the Big Dig. And like I said, they were coming out here looking for man-made items. Their entire purpose for what is called the Tule Springs Expedition, also called the Big Dig, was trying to find evidence of the earliest occurrence of people in North America. What they found was not that impressive. The site wasn't any older than any of the other early man sites in the North American continent. But we have a series of different artifacts that we have here. We've got different projectile points. You can see there's different shapes, sizes, and even different materials. We also have this item right here, which was used to punch holes, probably in leather. And then this right here, this is part of what's called a mono. So this was actually something that they would use with a flat stone, and they would try to, or they would actually grind up grain in between the two stones. So that's what we found there. Now, some of the items that were found were a little bit controversial. Just because scientists can't really agree whether they were man-made or if they were naturally occurring. One of those items is this right here. So this is a piece of bone from one of the large animals that lived in the Tule Springs area. Now, the way that it's shaped sort of suggests that it may have been a tool, but like I said, some researchers don't agree that this is a tool. All right. Now, we've talked about some of the man-made items. Now we're going to move on to fossils. And in the Big Dig, they even though the archaeological portion was a little bit of a disappointment for them, they found a ton of fossils. They found dozens of sites, hundreds of fossils, and this is actually one of those from a site that is located inside Ice Age Fossil State Park. So this is the lower jaw of a horse called Scott's horse. This is actually one of 3 types of horses that we have evidence for in the Las Vegas Valley and in Tule Springs. This is the larger of the 3, and it would have been roughly the same size as some of the regular horses or horses that we're familiar with today, but it would have had features that more closely resembled things like burros, donkeys, and zebras. Now, one of the cool things about this particular fossil is we can kind of get a sense for how old it was when it died. So one of the things that we look for when we're trying to determine age for things is wear on the teeth. And with horses, there's a few other things, but these teeth are worn down pretty low. You can see we're almost down to the end of this curved bit right here. And then if we move towards the front of the jaw, these incisors, these front teeth, those are actually coming out at an angle, moving more straight forward out of the mouth instead of up like they would in a younger horse. They're also triangular shaped, and that doesn't happen in younger horses. Younger horses have more of an oval shape in like this direction right here. So that also indicates that this horse was up there in age. Now, the estimate for this is that it was at least 20 years old, possibly older, but that's pretty old for a horse. All right. Now, after all of these discoveries, everything in the area kind of went quiet. So decades went by, 4 actually, exactly, went by without anything really happening in the valley. Then in the early 2000s, a team of scientists and researchers came from the San Bernardino County Museum. They were asked to survey an area of Tule Springs that would later become the Tule Springs Fossil Beds National Monument. I do have some of the fossils that they recovered from their expeditions to the valley. And like I said before, we're going to highlight some of the megafauna. So this one right here, this is the first one we're going to look at. So this is a set of molars from a Columbian mammoth. Now this one is kind of fun because you have 2 teeth, but what you can tell from these teeth is actually this one would have been up in the front of the jaw. And the way we could tell that is because the chewing surface is completely exposed. It's also worn down almost to the jawbone here. And then we've got this other tooth, which would have been growing in behind it. And as you can see, only part of the chewing surface has actually been exposed. Now, this tooth, once it was worn down far enough, would actually fall out of the jaw, and this one would move into its place. And as it gets worn down, it would actually wear down all the way through all of these plates back here. All right. Now, the next thing that we have, oh, and I should say actually, the Columbian mammoths were the largest animal that we find in Tule Springs, and they were actually they're related to modern elephants. You guys might be familiar with woolly mammoths. These are their bigger, presumably less hairy cousins, essentially. We don't have woolly mammoths in the area. Now, this next one was actually an important find for Tule Springs because it was the first of its kind. So these 2 portions of bone are actually from a arm or forelimb of a saber-toothed cat. So it's the first saber-toothed cat that was ever found in the Tule Springs area. So this is actually part of the upper arm. It's the humerus, which is between your shoulder and your elbow. And this is actually the portion that would have been in the shoulder socket up here. And then this one right here is actually the bone called the radius. And that is if you have your arm like this and you have your thumb pointed up, your radius is actually this bone right here, but there's another bone in there as well. We just didn't find that one. All right, now moving on to the next one here. This is the jaw from a bison. Now, we had lots of bison in the Tule Springs area. We actually have found so many that they're the 3rd most common, or 2nd most common, I guess, fossil found in the Tule Springs area. We have evidence of 2 types of bison. One had really long horns that kind of came out straight from the side of their head and curved up at the ends. And the other one had horns similar to the modern bison that you still see roaming the Great Plains in North America. All right. Now, moving on from the San Bernardino County collections, we have our next group of researchers that came to the area. So this group came out in 2011. to survey the area that would eventually be called Ice Age Fossil State Park. I was actually fortunate enough to be part of this team, super exciting. And we were from UNLV, or the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And this team was actually led by our very own Josh Bondi, who is manning the camera right now. But some of the things that we found in terms of the megafauna are some of these items right here. So right here in the front, we've got 2 bones from a camel. This first one is actually one of the teeth. So this is a lower molar. This is the 3rd molar. So it would have actually been in the very back of the jaw. So think about where your last tooth is, the very back of your jaw. That's where this one would have sat, in the camel's mouth. Now the next one, this one's a little bit beat up, but what it is, it's actually part of the lower limb bone. It's called a metapodial. Now we do have one that is in much better shape than this, but it's on display at one of our other parks. So I wasn't able to show that one to you guys today. But camels are actually that's tied in first place with the mammoths for the most common fossil found in the Tule Springs area. And we're actually using camels as our mascot for Ice Age Fossil State Park. So when people come to the park after it's open and they visit the museum space, they will be pleasantly surprised with a life-size full skeleton of a Camelops hysterinus, which is the camel that I was talking about right now. Now the next item was another first for the Tule Springs area. This little thing right here, this is a replica of the actual fossil, because the actual fossil is on display at another park as well. But this tiny little thing is the first evidence of dire wolves in the state of Nevada. Now this is another metapodial, but if you're thinking about where it is on your body, it would have been right here. So it's one of your hand or foot bones, right before your fingers or toes. That one's pretty cool. Now the next item was one of our largest finds. The single largest bone or fossil that we recovered actually from that trip. This is a tusk from a juvenile mammoth. This is known as the Tuscany tusk, which is kind of a fun name, and there is a good story behind that. But this fossil is almost 4 feet long, and we've got the root end over here where it was growing out from the mouth. And then if you follow it all the way over here, it gets really fragmented towards the tip because that part was exposed at the surface. So we weren't able to recover all of the tip of this, but we still got a lot of it that's going to go on display at the visitor center. All right, so I've talked a lot about megafauna. That wasn't the only, those aren't the only types of fossils we find in the area. A lot of them are of a lot smaller animals. Many of them never went extinct. So they're still around today. I have a bunch of pictures of some of these different animals. Some of them may be familiar to you, but of all the large animals that we have, we've got things like the coyote here. And then we have the antelope. We also have deer. We have mountain lions and bobcats. And then we have some smaller animals too. So we've got the black-tailed jackrabbit, and we have the desert cottontail right here. We've also got one of our favorite reptile friends, the desert tortoise. And we have multiple different types of birds, some of which are things like the owl, like the burrowing owl here, or hawks, like the red-tailed hawk. We also had a number of fossils from other types of birds. We had waterfowl, like ducks and things, also some songbirds. And we even have a ton of fossils from rodents and reptiles and even amphibians and fish too. Don't forget the fish. Now, fossils like this are still being found all over Tule Springs today. And one of the things that we do as park staff is we try to protect those things so that they could be preserved for future generations. And we can't always do it alone. So there are some things that you can do to help protect these items. So if you come across anything, leave it alone. Don't pick it up. Leave it just as you found it. Take some pictures. And then we encourage you to talk to park staff and share your discoveries. So if you find a ranger or somebody working in the visitor center, you can tell them and they will relay that information to whoever needs it. This goes a long way to help us not only protect sites, but find new sites and keep track of some of the sites that we're already aware of. Now, just so you guys know, in state parks, wildlife preserves, and national parks, it's actually illegal to remove fossils, artifacts, rocks, plants, animals, anything really. So all of that stuff has to stay where you found it. And what you can do to help us with that is you can help us protect the land, because protecting the land actually helps protect the artifacts and the fossils, but it also helps with the plants and animals that call that place home. And it makes it so that everybody who visits can have the same enjoyable experience that you had when you come to those outdoor spaces. So I've got a little list of things that we can do. So the first one is make memories, not messes. So basically clean up after yourself, clean up after your pets. Don't deliberately break branches off trees or carve your name into rocks or anything like that. We don't want to disturb anything out there. We want to keep it as natural as possible. The next one is to take pictures, not souvenirs. So when I was talking about leaving rocks and plants and fossils and everything behind, that's what I'm talking about. I don't want a fossil to end up on your bookshelf or something as a personal souvenir. Next thing is to keep wildlife wild. That means don't feed the animals, no matter how much they beg and how cute they are. You have to give them their distance. They are wild, so they do need their space, and some of them can be dangerous. And then the next thing is, don't try to befriend them and don't try to take them home to be your pet. I don't care how fuzzy they are. And then be respectful of others. So everybody has a right to enjoy outdoor spaces, and part of your job when you're protecting the area is to make sure that your actions don't impact that ability of somebody else to enjoy that space, and that your actions don't impact the future of people visiting that area. The next thing is to stick to the trails. So trails are there for a reason. One of the main reasons is because they guide you to areas that have cool things to see, but they also guide people away from really sensitive areas that need additional protection. And in addition to both of those things, staying on the trail actually helps keep you safe. You're way less likely to get lost if you stick to the trail. The last thing, have fun. Enjoy yourself. Listen to the birds. Enjoy the wind blowing through your hair. Whatever it is that you want to do, enjoy yourself. Just remember those other tips. Now, the area of Tule Springs for a long time was not protected by anybody. And actually, up until 5 years ago, there were no parks, so we had no park staff or anything to help manage any of the land or the resources found there. So decades went by where people would go out and they would, recreationally use it for shooting or driving their off-road vehicles, or people even just used it as a dump. There's a ton of trash out there. Now, when a group of women found out about the fossils and the condition of some of these sites, they were inspired to create a group called the Protectors of Tule Springs. Their main mission was to bring awareness to the site to help to get protection for it and get people to help and just be aware of what's going on. And so the next part of this actually goes to the Monumental Mammoth. So the Monumental Mammoth was a project that came from the brain of a 17-year-old Girl Scout named Tahoe Mack. She saw a presentation given by one of the Protectors of Tule Springs, and she was inspired. She was actually really moved and kind of upset about the amount of trash and things that was found out there. And what she wanted to do as a young artist was take some of that stuff and turn it into something beautiful. And that's where the idea of the Monumental Mammoth came in. Now, with the help of Protectors of Tule Springs, there were multiple cleanups, and there still are multiple cleanups that are going to happen in the future. But some of the items that we actually find out in the desert or have been found in the desert are things like this. So this is actually part of a propane tank that was obviously used as target practice. We also have just random things like bike chains and gears, but then also shell casings. We have thousands of shell casings. So people would go out there, they wouldn't really pay much attention to what was in the ground beneath them, and they didn't really care that much about cleaning up after themselves. But with all the stuff that was collected, some of it was saved and repurposed and actually went into building the monumental mammoth. Now, this project is really special because it serves as a symbol and a reminder for people to take care of the land. This is a life-size sculpture of a Columbian mammoth, and it has gotten attention across the world. It's been talked about in articles all over the place. It also went to Burning Man, which is where it's pictured right here, and Life is Beautiful, both last year, where it was seen by just a ton of people. I also have some up-close details of some of the work on the legs. But wherever she goes, that message of taking care of the land and being respectful and thinking about what you leave behind goes with her. Now, this project isn't quite finished. She's going to be installed permanently at Ice Age Fossil State Park sometime next year. So if you may be interested in helping make this project more of a reality, we are looking for help. Donations are appreciated and very welcome. If you're interested, I can leave my email, or do I just say my email?
You can say your email.
Okay. It's dreynoso, which is DREYNOSO at no. Now I don't remember the last part.
It's okay. We'll add it into the video. So
Okay.
We'll make sure that Dawn has it.
Spaced.
Yes, it's okay. We space it. So we're actually going to turn it over to Ralph now. And we're going to start our Q&A with Ralph, and me and Dr. Bondi are going to head on the other side with Ranger Dawn to answer any of your questions you may have. All right.
Thank you.
That was an absolutely awesome event. We have a lot of questions from all of our students and teachers, and thank you everyone for joining. And if you have any questions, just message them in the chat for Ranger Dawn and for Becky. So our first question is, how has COVID impacted the development or opening of the park?
That's a great question. So because of COVID, we've actually had a lot of our timelines pushed back because they had to cut down on production of things, or they weren't able to get materials, or they just weren't able to work in a safe manner. So that has caused some delays, but we are recovering from that.
Okay, so our next question is, how did you guys all decide to work? Well, first of all, Ranger Dawn, how did you decide to become a park ranger?
That actually came from my time with UNLV, working at the park, collecting the fossils, like the Tuscany tusk and those. I was an undergraduate at the time. I was studying geology, and I've always had an interest in paleontology, but working out there at the park, we actually got to work with park rangers while we were out there. And so I got to see what it was that they did. And then as I learned more, when the opportunity became available, I jumped on it. Because when I heard that they were going to have a visitor center and they needed rangers and things at Ice Age Fossil State Park, which I was already familiar with, I was like, sign me up. I'm there. I got it.
So we wanted to know, how tall and wide is the mammoth? Is like a normal mammoth when you guys find those?
Well, we don't find any whole mammoths. The height is like, of an adult male, I believe, is 13 to 14 feet at the shoulders. I don't know how wide they would be though. Do you guys?
Probably at least 4 or 5 feet wide, at least.
At least, yeah.
So they would have been even bigger than the ones that you would see at a zoo or that are living today.
Yeah.
These Columbian mammoths were the largest mammoths, so they were quite big.
We have a question. This has been a few classes have been wondering, why aren't the bones together? How do they kind of drift apart?
Sure. So if you think of an animal out in the desert or an animal that dies on the edge of a pond, and there's going to be things like vultures that come by, or there's going to be a gust of wind or something like that. And all the things that go into breaking down an animal, all the gross, stinky things that break down an animal. All of that happens just naturally. It's happened through geologic time. And so when we find an isolated bone or an isolated tusk here or there, that's kind of what you expect to find when you're out on a hike. You might find a bone of a rabbit or a bone of a coyote or a sheep. So the same thing's happening because those bones are more resistant. Typically, we just find a bone here or there also in the rocks. It's really rare to find an animal completely put together, and those are special. All the three of us have always, that's what we want to find, but we're not going to pass up a really great bone or a tusk like this either.
And even the smaller portions of an animal that we find can tell us a lot of important things. Even though it'd be really cool to find an entire skeleton of an animal, finding a tusk or even the smallest thing like a tooth can tell us a whole bunch. Just like the knuckle bone of the dire wolf, we wouldn't have known that they existed without that tiny little bone.
So the kids want to know, what kind of fossils would they see if they came to the visitor center at the park?
Well, you would see all of the megafauna that I talked about, but we're also going to have a lot of other fossils on display. We're going to show off some of the clams and snails and things that we found in the park. We have some fish fossils. We also have things from reptiles and rodents. And I'm trying to think of what else. We have a pronghorned antelope, mountain lion, let's see, more ground sloth stuff. We've got a bunch of different things.
I'll ask Ranger Dawn a question. Since this is a brand new state park here in Nevada, it's still under construction, right?
Yes.
All right, so can you tell anyone, kind of when you think it might be open? Is there plans, or when can they actually start visiting to see these fossils?
Well, we are hoping to open next year, but because of COVID and everything, we don't have a date yet. We're kind of guesstimating when we're going to be open. But if you are interested in finding that stuff out, you can actually find Ice Age Fossil State Park on Facebook and Instagram. And I actually will be posting all of the updates about when we're going to open and different things like that. But also, I like to post things like fun facts about different animals or some of the history of the park. So if you follow us, you'll see a bunch of different things, but you'll definitely be able to find out when we're going to open.
So social media is definitely a good way if you or your parents would like to get, I guess, the most recent information.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
So we have a couple of questions that have to do with the age of the fossils. It's a two-part question because a number of people have asked both. What is the oldest fossil you guys have ever found there? And then on average, what is the age of the fossils that are found there?
That's a really good question. We have fossils that range in age from about 12,000 years to almost 100,000 years. Some of the more fossil-rich sites that we have are more in the range of like 45 to 55,000 years old.
Good answer. So someone wants to know, how do you use, and this for Ranger Dawn, how do you use reading, writing, and math in your everyday ranger life?
Well, in order to find out information on all these animals and even some of the plants and animals that live out there today, I have to do a lot of reading. So a lot of research goes into knowing the sort of stuff that I've talked about today. Math, I mean, we haven't opened yet, but I know when we open, I'm going to be using math to count money for, the gift shop or whatever. And then what was the other subject? Writing. Okay. So I also write a lot of content for things. I have to come up with all the programs for the park. So when you come and you go on like a ranger guided hike, I've actually written a lot of the talking points and things that we want to share with you while you're on that hike. If you come for an activity, there's a lot of information that goes into that. So I do a lot of writing that way too. But I'm also working on some research writing. So some of the fossils and things that we have haven't really been documented in articles and scientific literature. So I'm trying to add to that body of knowledge by writing that as well.
You guys know what the first fossil, like in documented history, was found at that park?
The first fossil that was documented was they had assumed, they had said it was a mastodon tooth. We haven't found any evidence of mastodon in the area, so we think maybe it was just misidentified and it was a mammoth tooth, but this was found back in 1903. And that whatever fossils that were found on that expedition have been lost. So we haven't actually had the opportunity to look at the fossil and confirm that for ourselves, but that was the first recorded fossil found.
And is it cool if we ask you guys a couple more questions?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, okay. So what is the rarest fossil that the park currently has?
Direwolf fossils, for sure. But any predator fossils, actually. So predators in this sort of environment, what I like to sort of bring up and have people imagine is if you think about the savanna of Africa, if you looked over the savanna of Africa, you would see herds and herds of large herbivores, so plant-eating animals. And you might see, you know, like a cheetah over there or a small pride of lions over there, but just by number, the predators are way outnumbered by the prey species. And we have a very similar thing in Tule Springs. So the items that we have the least of are actually some of the larger predators like the dire wolf, saber-toothed cat, and the American lion.
So the students want to know, how much time does it take on average for you guys to remove a fossil from the ground? So I think that would be for any of you, because you all have experience with that.
Do you want to do it?
Sure. So me and Don both were on site when we excavated this Tuscany tusk, as it's called. That took us about a week and a half, and this is not a very big tusk. So it just depends on the situation. So if you have an intact tusk, which is a really fragile fossil, you have to go really slow. You have to apply special glues to it. So it can take weeks to get a single bone out of the ground. Otherwise, like the direwolf bone, it's a really resistant, hard little bone, and just picked it up off the ground in a matter of seconds. So every bone is different. Every situation is different. And so being a good paleontologist, being a good scientist, you have to observe, you have to make your observations, then you have to deduce what it's going to take to get that thing safely out of the ground. Because once you start digging, you're responsible for that fossil for the rest of its life.
That is interesting. I never knew that. So that brings me to my next question, is a lot of people want to know, how do you guys determine the age of the fossils?
The age can be kind of a tricky thing sometimes. For some of these items, they're young enough that we could use radiocarbon dating. And so that's something that a lot of people have heard about. And that will actually, you can get an age for any sort of organic material as long as it's younger than about 50,000 years old. Anything older than that, a lot of what you have to do is you're not dating the fossil so much, you're actually dating the sediment or the dirt that it's in. So you find different minerals or things that are actually in the dirt. And the best case scenario is if you find a fossil in a layer of sediment, you have something that you can date on top and something that you can date on the bottom. And then you use those two ages to give that fossil an age range. But that's basically how you date fossils.
Yeah, that is very detailed and sounds very complicated, but we're going to trust that it's accurate. So we're going to go ahead and with our final question, can you tell the kids if they're interested in becoming a park ranger like yourself, what kind of things should they study in school?
Well, I studied, I did a lot of math, a lot of science, but I studied geoscience, which allowed me to become a geologist. And I also focused on paleontology and geochronology, which was the dating of rocks. But to be a ranger, you just have to go to college and get a degree. It could be in anything. Like the supervisor for Ice Age Fossil State Park, he actually has a degree in history. So it's totally different field, but he still ended up in the same sort of job. And so there's a wide range of things that you can study and still become a park ranger.